Welcome to the Shudder. This is a story sent to me by Miss Sue Richards. Now, I don't normally give last names, even with consent, but I felt since this is the only story on this video that it was warranted. It's a series of happenings with a moment of enlightenment. It's got everything a good story needs, and I appreciate Miss Sue trusting me with her experiences. Okay, shoo that dog out of your favorite recliner and settle in. I moved to the North Georgia mountains in 2002. At the time, I had just finished massage therapy school. Massage was my midlife crisis second career after nursing for 20 years. The plan was to set up my fledgling massage practice in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and live in an even smaller town nearby, close to the Ocoee River. In addition to being a weekend warrior, I also taught whitewater kayaking at the local outfitter and spent the summer of 2002 raft guiding for the same company on weekends. It was a busy year, and I was living in an apartment that was fraught with problems with the landlord. When it was finally time to move, at the encouragement of a realtor, instead of an apartment, I went house hunting. By now it was September of '03. I found my house, a solid little ranch style in a pretty tree-lined, quiet neighborhood. It was wonderful to own a home in a small rural town of 1,000 people. The year before, I had taken in a small rescue dog and was looking forward to walking her around our hilly neighborhood, which would be good exercise for both of us. It started the first night I took my dog Katie out for a walk late in the evening. At around 11 p.m., I felt a bit uneasy at first, but then had the thought, hey, I'm in the country. I'm perfectly safe out here. Most of my life had been lived in cities up north. I told myself that, unlike the city, I had nothing to worry about now. Katie and I trotted happily up the street. At the top of the hill was a wooded area to our left. As we walked by, a rock came flying out of the trees and landed at my feet. We stopped, and I heard whispering voices in the trees where the rock was thrown. Another rock came flying in at us, not hitting either of us, and again, there was more whispering in the trees. Assuming it was kids being rude, I yelled, "Hey, I just moved to this neighborhood. That's not very nice." Again, I heard the whispering. I just continued our walk, determined not to let this bother me. We walked a bit further, and when we started back down our street, another rock came flying out of the same wooded spot and landed at my feet. I knew whoever this was obviously wasn't trying to hurt me. They were just trying to get my attention, but it was still annoying. Farther down the hill, just before reaching my house, was an abandoned house across the street. A very distinct whistle came from somewhere in the vicinity of this house. I thought someone was trying to call my dog, so I kept her from investigating and hightailed it to our house. Again, I was more irritated at the whistling than scared. I thought it was possibly one of the men in the neighborhood who had stopped by to talk to me that day, assuming a divorced, middle-aged woman was an easy target. This one guy in particular liked my dog, and it sounded like he was whistling to her in a pitch from low to high, almost like a slide whistle. The next morning, I noticed something on the wall in my carport. There were two little woven things, looking like they were made of straw or dried grass. The designs were odd and strangely braided. All I could think was they were some strange Appalachian gift that a guy might try to make for a girl he's interested in. I just left them there, not wanting to take the bait. The next day, they were gone. As the days, weeks, and months went by, I noticed more oddities. Under the trees in my yard were sticks pushed into the ground at strange intervals. Branches of the pine tree at the corner of my property were broken off, high up from the base of the tree. I had a pear tree in the backyard that was prolific with fruit. The plan was to pick the pears when they were big and ripe enough. However, when I went to harvest them, the fruit on the lower branches was gone, some of it on the ground half eaten. I assumed some animal, like the deer that passed through the yard, were able to stretch their necks up for the pears. That didn't deter me. I got a ladder and climbed up to try for the fruit that was higher in the tree, but the pears I could reach now were all half eaten like the ones on the ground, and by something with a large mouth. I wondered if a bear had come through at night and stretched itself up to the higher branches for a nibble. Speaking of deer coming through the neighborhood, one night when Katie and I stepped out of the house and started walking up the street, several deer came flying up the street perpendicular to us. They were really moving. I'd never seen deer run that fast. I just guided Katie down the opposite way and did a short walk in our neighborhood. And that nasty smell from the summer on the Ocoee River in '04, I came home from work one evening in autumn, taking my sheets from my massage practice to the laundry room, which is at the end of the carport. When I opened the door, that same fetid odor hit me. It made me wonder what animal had been hanging around in my laundry room so close to my back door. There were strange noises at night, and even some in the daytime. One day, when I had the rare opportunity to come home for lunch, I was walking Katie up the street when I heard a loud wood knock. My neighbor was in her yard, and we started talking. As we chatted, there was another loud knock, which we ignored, and then another. I asked her if that was a woodpecker. It didn't sound like any woodpecker I'd ever heard before, but maybe there was some bird like it, making this loud, singular whack on a tree. My neighbor assured me, no, that was not a woodpecker, but she didn't offer what else it might be. Sometimes very late at night, or very early hours of the morning, I'd hear tapping on my bedroom window. Checking around the house didn't reveal any nearby branches that could be making that tapping. I'm grateful now I didn't look out my window at night. If I'd seen a Bigfoot, it would have definitely traumatized me. We continued our late-night walks, accompanied at times by a strange howling and, for a time, screaming that sounded like a woman was being attacked. One massage client told me it was made by a panther. Another said we didn't have big cats in the area. This proved untrue when I almost hit a tawny-colored cougar that ran out in front of my slow-moving car in broad daylight. The thought of a panther in the neighborhood was scary, but also kind of exciting. My dog Katie would look up the trees as we walked by, but no big cats emerged, thank goodness. One night, while walking in the immediate neighborhood, we walked by one of the houses that bordered a large wooded area that continued on downhill toward the Toccoa River. That woman in distress scream was very loud, sounding like it was from the back of the house. When I got home, I called the police and told them I thought someone was in trouble, as the screaming sounded distinctly human. They asked me where it was coming from. When I told them, they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We know what it is." When I asked if it was a panther, they said no, and again, not to worry. There were times walking Katie in the daytime in and around our neighborhood when I would get the heebie-jeebies about walking in a particular area, especially an area that was thickly wooded. It felt like I was getting a mental message, don't walk any further, and Katie would respond differently to things we heard, saw, and felt. Sometimes she would bark and growl, trying to go after whatever was in a tree line or bushes. Sometimes she would stand stock still and stare, like me, trying to figure out what we were looking at. There were a few mornings when I had to go in early to work. I would take her out for her morning constitutional just after dawn, and she wasn't having any part of it. I would half drag her across my yard trying to get her to do her business before she was locked inside for most of the day, but she would have her tail between her legs, pulling me back toward the house as hard as she could. I'd get mad at her, wondering why she was acting that way. Knowing what I do now, I think there may have been a Bigfoot or two possibly hiding in the wooded area just behind my backyard. There were the possible sightings before the definitive sighting. Walking through my property from the street one night, I noticed something moving underneath my deck. There's a lattice covering that partially hides the underside of the deck. I didn't have anything stored under there at the time, and it looked like two bulky people in ski jackets were laying under there, trying not to be seen. This was one time Katie was quiet. I was planning on walking across my yard to the house, which would take us right by the deck, but then I thought we'd better walk around the yard, staying in the street until we got to the house. Whoever or whatever was under there was not something I wanted to come into contact with. Another time, it looked like a very tall, thin man was standing on the corner of my neighbor's property, but this was a good ways off, and the street light wasn't giving much detail. Another time, when Katie and I were starting up the street, it looked like there was a man trying to peer into my neighbor's house. From the street light, it looked like he had a bulky jacket on and a winter hat with a short visor on it. I have since seen the side view of a Sasquatch on Scott Carpenter's book cover, Truth Denied, the Sasquatch DNA Study, and it made me jump, because that's exactly what it looked like. Again, my dog just stopped and stared like I did. This person saw me, jumped down on all fours, and ran behind a big pine tree. I just stood there, not sure what to do, and then it looked like it ran into the bushes underneath her front windows. This was confusing because it suddenly looked smaller, and I thought maybe it was just a dog, and continued walking Katie down the street this time, not up the hill, keeping my eye on the tree in my neighbor's yard. It just gave me a weird feeling. All this was going on from the time I moved in 2003 till the time my sweet little Katie died in 2014. There were more oddities, house slaps, two tall guys talking in low voices in the backyard across the street, a strange figure that appeared in shadow at my front door window with a domed head and no neck with bulky shoulders. By this time, after 2007, I had brought my mother to live with me. We were playing cards in the living room with my sister who was visiting. When I saw that shape in the small window of my front door, I yelled, "What's that?" and it disappeared. My sister's back was to the door, and when I told her what I saw and she turned to look and there was nothing there, her reaction was, "Are you nuts?" Mom was 89 at the time. She is now 101 and still with me. Wow, that's fantastic, Sue. I read to her at night, sing a hymn, and recite prayers together. And there have been times, even recently, when I've heard low voices outside her bedroom window after I've finished singing. The definitive encounters occurred around the same time the TV show Finding Bigfoot started. Though not a huge fan of the show, it was teaching me about Bigfoot behavior. Rock throwing, whispering in trees, whistling, wood knocks, how they look, how they sound, were all things I had been experiencing. Not knowing anything about them prior to this, not believing it was real, watching the show in its early days was a good source of information, a good eye-opener. One night, walking down the hill toward the house, the closer we got to home, I heard a loud howling. It started low and deep, climbed to a sustained ah-oh sound, and then tapered off. It sounded like it was just down the street, and I thought it might be a lost hunting dog who was in trouble. A friend had recently rescued an emaciated hunting dog that she found at a nearby river. I put my little dog in the house and went back out to look for this animal that sounded in distress, except now there was more than one howl going on, and it sounded much closer to the house. By the time I got to the end of my short driveway, I was overwhelmed with fear. A very strong thought came to me: go back in the house and don't come out again. I obeyed the thought, ran back into the house, though I kept wondering where the heck such a strong, distinct thought had come from. Soon after, either on TV show or the internet, I heard an example of the Ohio howl. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, because that's exactly what I had heard. From then on, I only walked Katie around our immediate neighborhood, but soon after would limit that to our yard. One night, as we walked around the neighborhood, I had the distinct feeling of being followed. I had felt this before, but not with the intensity I felt that night. As we walked up the steep little hill toward my street, Katie stopped again to sniff around. I looked down the hill, and crossing the street at the bottom of the hill we just came up, diagonally on all fours, was a creature that looked like a lanky gorilla. It had the distinctive dome-shaped head and loped across the street. It was not a bear. I've seen bears cross the street, and almost hit one while driving one night. This was not running the way a bear would. By now, I knew what it was, and it appeared to be heading toward the back of a group of houses whose backyards abutted to mine. I said, "Run, Katie," and we ran past a few houses till we reached ours. I knew this thing could beat us to the door if it wanted to, but fortunately it didn't. Gratefully, I didn't hear anything that night, no house slaps, howling, or growling, and didn't see any dark shapes as I furtively peeked out the curtains. After that, things seemed to quiet down when we stuck to walking only in front and side yards of my property. Maybe that's what they wanted, for me to stop walking around the area late at night. I very rarely saw another person on those walks, just occasionally deer, once in a while packs of wild hogs, and apparently a few Bigfoot. Wow, what a great story. Is it enough for some to just wonder if these strange things that happen to them are indeed Bigfoot? I doubt it's the case for anybody listening to this. I want to thank you again, Miss Sue, for letting me tell your story. I'm sure you've all noticed that there's a crack in the windshield of my truck. Lots of flying rocks on oil-filled lease roads. But thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed Miss Sue's story, please consider hitting that like button. And if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.